अस्सलाम वालेकुम नाजरीन, मैं हूँ आपका होस्ट शाफिन खालिद रहमान और प्रोग्राम पढ़ा लिखा पाकिस्तान की एक और एपिसोड के साथ आपकी खिदमत में हाजिर हूँ। आज हमारे प्रोग्राम में हमने दावत दी है BNU के स्टूडेंट अफेयर्स के एग्जीक्यूटिव डायरेक्टर मिस्टर ज़ईम को। आज हम ज़ईम साहब से ये बात करेंगे कि पाकिस्तान के एजुकेशन सिस्टम में क्या क्या फ्लॉज है, उसको किस तरह बेहतर किया जा सकता है और बीकन हाउस नेशनल यूनिवर्सिटी क्या रोल प्ले कर रही है इस बेसिकली जो डिवाइड है उसको ब्रिज करने के लिए। So thank you so much, sir, for joining us, and thank you so much for your time. So basically, our first question is, what do you think about Pakistan's education system?
Pakistan's education system is definitely there, but it has many flaws in it. And the flaw essentially is that we are unable to cover the people who need literacy in this country. And because of that, there is some sort of like uh, you can say a policy mismatch, because when we say that every person in Pakistan has to be educated or a person has to be literate, then we need to define what literacy is first, and then see exactly whether our policy and the active role of the government has reaped any benefit out of that or not. So, so there are different levels of education. There is the primary, there is the secondary, there is the higher secondary and the tertiary. And as per the Millennium Development Goals, we expected that we have to have universal primary education in the first instance. We are unable to assure that because the current policy is basically something which does not cover the kind of critical mass that we want to cover under the primary education fold. So, and the primary school system is not good. I mean, whether it's run by the government or there are private players in that, there is some scope in the private sector. And I think institutions such as the Beacon House school system and there are different you say variants of that, they come to substitute the government wherever there is a gap. So the private sector has played its role and it's playing its role. Likewise, at the secondary level, we also see more private players than the government players. So yes, there's a huge scope. Beacon House National University has a school of education. We basically train people who are in service teachers, people who are school administrators. But again, people who are better educated would seek better opportunities also. So I see that there is another lacuna in the policy, and that is that good teachers would not want to go and work in the government sector, especially at the primary and the secondary levels. We can see some really good and great teachers going and teaching at the university level, which is the tertiary level of education. But you don't see such good talent going into schools, and that's the base actually. So if the baseline is strong, then gradually the other levels
The basic education system would improve eventually. So my other question is, not everyone in Pakistan can afford private education, and as you said that the more illiterate part of the country, the people from that strata of the society, they can't afford private education. So what do you think we can do to improve that divide?
Well, there's several ways that you can address that. I mean, first you have to set your policy right, and then you can see exactly how does that policy translate into action. As we say, the practical aspect of a policy is more important than just something which is written in the form of a draft. So there have been many test cases where the private sector was called in to adopt government schools, and that has worked really well. For instance, there are non-profit players such as the CARE Foundation and the Citizens Foundation, the TCF school system, where they have gone out into far-flung areas and they've adopted schools. They've gone into the outskirts of the urbanized centers like Lahore. They've gone out into the fringes of the city and seen exactly where, I mean, so urban areas, for instance, they're more rural type of areas which are in the outskirts of major urbanized cities. They've taken up and they've adopted schools over there. The other thing that the government can do is the government can introduce a subsidy policy. For instance, if you really see that there is a student that, I mean, or a child that has talent and has the ability, and the parents have willingness for that child to go to school, the government can introduce a subsidy in the private sector. So the government, instead of just funding the government school system can also have another variant in terms of a policy that, okay, for instance, you have the private school education is about 1,000 rupees, and the parents are willing to send their child to the school, and the child is of merit, then you can introduce something like a 500 rupee subsidy, per child. And the 500 subsidy can straight away come from the government and be paid to the private school sector, because they're good at governance, you see, so they're good at running the system of primary education. So any sort of activity would have to do with the willingness and the ability part both. So if we see that there is a ability in the child to acquire education, we can look at the willingness part by the parent, because the parents are the main drivers of education. I mean, so if you look at the rural areas and look at people at that class which is lesser privileged, they would want to send their kids to work so that they can bring income into the household. But so that basically affects the willingness part of the parent. But if the parent is willing, or out of 4 children, they are willing to send 1 child, and they've picked up a winner out of their own children, and they want 1 child to go to school, then the government can come in and introduce a subsidy that 500 rupees.
That seems like a very good solution. नासरीन, जैसा आपको पता है कि हमारे प्रोग्राम पढ़ा लिखा पाकिस्तान में इसी तरह के सॉल्यूशंस और इसी तरह के लोगों से हम अपनी ऑप्शंस लेते हैं आगे, और हम कंटिन्यू करेंगे अपने प्रोग्राम को दूसरे सेगमेंट में एक ब्रेक के बाद. वेलकम बैक नाजरीन. प्रोग्राम के सेकंड सेगमेंट के साथ मैं आपकी खिदमत में वापस हाजिर हूँ. सो मिस्टर ज़ईम, बेसिकली हमारा सेकंड सेगमेंट है, उसके अंदर कोई क्वेश्चन सेगमेंट है, जस्ट यू विल हैव टू आंसर वेरी प्रॉम्प्टली. ओके, सो द फर्स्ट क्वेश्चन इज बेस्ट सिटी इन पाकिस्तान फॉर एजुकेशन.
Lahore.
Lahore. Okay, second question is co-curricular or academics?
Both. Both.
Both. Okay, we'll get back to it in the third segment. And third question is a bit funny. Nawaz Sharif or Imran Khan?
Neither.
So we'll move on to the third section now. So in the third segment, sir, the first question is, how do you think Beacon House National University is contributing to the society, as it is the #1 liberal arts university? So how do you think they are contributing to the society?
Well, the first and the foremost is that having a university itself is an undertaking. It's a big resolve, and we've contributed to close to about 3,700 students in the human capital of this country. I think that's a phenomenal contribution, because we're really, really confident about our graduates. So people who graduate out of BNU, no matter they come from which discipline, we believe that they are playing their part as agents of change wherever they are. So that's the primary undertaking that the university has, which every university essentially should have. The second is that it's a liberal arts university. It's Pakistan's first liberal arts university. We basically believe in a unique kind of a citizen, and a citizen of the world. We basically believe that anyone who's coming out of BNU would not be, just inherently in tune with the concept of nationalism, but globalism, you see. So, and that's how our study design, the course design, and the structure is. You see a lot of interdisciplinarity. So a student from psychology would be taking courses in liberal arts, and a student from fashion and jewelry may take courses in media and theatre, film and television. So we believe in making a well-rounded person. There's nothing new that any university for that matter can teach to a person who's already been through 12 years of education. But we can nudge them in a direction where they can achieve something substantial for themselves and for the world. And that's the secondary undertaking that we have. The third undertaking is that BNU does not believe only in imparting education, but taking up causes. We become champions of several causes. So there has been a lot of talk about feminism. There's nothing wrong about feminism as long as you see that in good light and you don't make a mockery out of it. It has been taken up as a very serious cause by our students, and we really dearly support them on that. There are a number of other things that our students keep on doing, and they go out and they have a voice, and their voice echoes also in the society. So the university also believes in having championship for just and reasonable causes in the society. Our students are very engaged. They do a lot of community engagement work. They go out into the community. They do work for people who are lesser privileged. and that has a huge support from the system of the university, from the faculty, from the management, and so on and so forth. So these are the three things that I can right away tell you that, yeah.
So basically, Beacon House National University hosted this event, BNU Festival, and it ended this weekend. So how do you think BNU Festival is doing in the market and in the society, and how it is supporting all the institutions all around Pakistan?
Well, I can tell you, festival has, there are two versions of the festival. The version of the festival that BNU students know, and the version of the festival that people outside BNU know. And interestingly, the event has substantial ownership across both communities. So the people within BNU's periphery or are bound, our students and our student community, they see it as an event of prestige. They see it as an event where they can open their doors to their fellows and their friends from other universities, colleges, and places. There's been quite a mystery about BNU, what goes around in here, what sort of a place it is, and so I believe that this provides that platform to our existing students over here. The second is the immense learning that our own community has in organizing things like that. We see a lot of our ethos in action when we organize events such as festival. These are called quasi-academic activities, and that's why I stressed upon both, that just as much as academics is important, the quasi-academic or co-curricular activities are just as important. So the learning part in that is where you see all that you have learned in your courses in action. You're organizing competitions where you have judges, they come from the industry, and then you are putting together and configuring a competition. For instance, there's a journalism competition, there's a there's a video production competition, there's a drama competition, there's a competition for rap battle music and all of that. All of these things and ingredients that you use in your disciplines such as journalism and documentary making and theater and film and even visual communication design. I mean, there are different aspects.
And top that with sports.
Yes, absolutely. And sports, basically, yeah, that provides you with the sports person spirit, you know. So the kind of spirit that you need, you have winning and losing, the whole concept of that, and you know, how do you, you know, get yourself back up when you lose? You see, so all of that. But you know, they configure these activities with a certain confidence that has been given to them through their academic strengths. So I believe that they see a lot of their academics in action when they organize that, and that gives them and entails a lot more confidence in them. For the people who are outside BNU, of course, it helps qualify a lot of misconceptions, misnomers. BNU is just like another place. For some people, it seems like an island. You see, so they think that, you know, they are in the mainland and we live on an island. But when they come and they see, they realize the people here at BNU are pretty much the same as that of, you know, their other friends and other people and all this. So there's great sociability that happens. They also see, then they take a lot of, you can say, good inspiration from it, and they organize events on their campuses after taking inspiration from the festival. So I believe that that does a lot of good. It you know, brings together people from across different backgrounds together on a single platform. So there are institutions from the public sector, from the private sector, all of them, they come, the students gel in, they make new friends. So there's immense sociability, there's good spirit in it. And I think that it serves really good to both parties within and outside BNU.
Yes. So moving on to our next question, and it is our last question. So since you have some international exposure, what do you think we can adopt from the international countries and the education systems over there here in Pakistan?
Well, what I've seen is that I think we have a very low expectation of ourselves as a nation. And that basically puts us on a pedestal of mediocrity only. If you keep high expectations of yourself, you certainly, if you cannot achieve very high, but if you miss by a couple of notches, you see, you still settle somewhere above mediocre, you know. And it's the case with which I see more or less everywhere. So I believe that besides education, in every sector and faculty of the society, we need to have very high expectations of ourselves. In education, for instance, we are only putting primary education as a universal, the universal availability of primary education as one of the tasks. Why not secondary or higher secondary education? should be universal. So if you start working towards that, you may end up with a couple of notches. I mean, you probably would end up at least universal primary education. So you set your targets very low, unfortunately. And that's what I've seen. I mean, they have people who have superior targets, they achieve good enough, and people who have mediocre targets would just
If you want to settle for good, you'll settle for good. If you aim for great, you will settle for great.
yeah. So yeah, absolutely. So I believe that, you know, in terms of education also, in terms of our own expectations of ourselves, we need to keep those expectations pretty high. At least we should be more than even confident of ourselves, and I think education exposure, both, they provide you with that level of confidence. So that's what I would like to advise to people, whether they are in the Department of Education or they're in any other department of the society, that they should just set a high target for themselves.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, sir. नाज़रीन, इसी के साथ हमारे प्रोग्राम का इख्तिताम हुआ है। हम आपको अगले हफ्ते फिर मिलेंगे एक और एपिसोड के साथ। तब तक के लिए अल्लाह हाफ़िज़।